I'm Gabi Tellez, grew up in Southern California, came out to Utah to do my undergrad at BYU, which I did I was business management and pre-med, and then went to LA to do my master's in systems engineering. And then bunch of different events and things like that. Ended up back in Utah a couple years after my master's. So when I wasn't in Utah, I was doing health system strengthening with Operation Smile in Sub-Saharan Africa. Worked for Levitt Partners DC office doing health policy consulting, was at a couple different biotech startups, and then came to Utah and got a job at Intermountain Health in their internal incubator. So helped to spin companies out of the health system. And then after about a year and a half of doing that, got asked to move over to the venture capital team. And so started doing venture capital specifically around healthcare, life science, biotech, and then got recruited by the state to help with some initiatives that they've been working on. And so technically my position right now, my title is the Director of Innovation and Commercialization at the Utah System of Higher Education. And then my other title is Managing Director of the Utah Innovation Lab. So basically how this all fits together, and hopefully this is relevant for the conversation, but basically how it all fits together is the Utah System of Higher Education is the organization that sees all public institutions of higher ed in the state. So think like University of Utah, UVU, but also like Davis Technical College. So there's 16. They're technical colleges and universities. And so the organization that I'm technically employed by helps to oversee all of those. And so my role as the Director of Innovation and Commercialization is to help specifically with that commercialization process of getting things outside of these university and technical college settings. So there's a number of initiatives that the state has supported that they basically came to the system of higher education and they said, hey, we want you guys to kind of own and operate these initiatives. So one of them is the Point. And so that's out at the point of the mountain where the state prison used to be. The state owns 600 acres of land. The central 100 acres of that is dedicated towards an innovation district. And so the innovation group at the Utah System of Higher Education was specifically brought in to help oversee that initiative and kind of vision what it could look like, but then also build out the programmatic elements of that innovation district, including being in charge of the first building that's getting built there, which is called Convergence Hall. And we can talk more about that if that's relevant. And then kind of the other initiative and where I've spent, honestly, a lot of my time the last couple of months is the Utah Innovation Lab. So this last legislative session, the state put aside $15 million to create a state-funded venture capital fund to help specifically with the commercialization of technologies being advanced, developed, or discovered at Utah institutions of higher education. So not only the 16 institutions supported by the Utah System of Higher Education, but also all of our private institutions as well. So in that capacity, again, have had a ton of opportunity to interface with all of the tech transfer and commercialization offices around the state, because we're really looking, how do we support this translation of research or student projects, IP patents, those types of things into the real world setting where they can actually bless people's lives and benefit society. So that was kind of a lot I threw at you guys. Sorry.
Oh, that's super cool.
Awesome.
I didn't know about half of that. So it's super cool to hear about that and like the process of you starting at BYU and getting to where you are today. That's super cool.
Now we're excited to debrief a little bit more and go into detail, but that's remarkable to see like where you started and then where you're at now.
Yeah. So
class.
Yeah, I bet. Lots of hard work too.
Yeah, and I hasn't been that long. I graduated from my undergrad in 2020.
Oh wow, good for you.
Moving fast.
That's inspiring.
Yeah.
Jam pack stuff in.
Yeah.
Okay, so to start with our first question, starting at BYU, our question is, what was your experience like attending BYU and what did you graduate with?
Okay, so I'll be totally honest. I did not want to come to BYU. As soon as I opened my acceptance, I had applied to a bunch of California schools coming from California, and I had applied, and like the second I got my BYU acceptance, I knew immediately it's where I needed to be. So it was like this whole internal battle of like, okay, I know this is what I'm supposed to do. Got here, and I think like it took me probably a year to adjust. I think like it does everybody, but I had grown up with this idea of like you go to college, it's like the best thing ever. And I got here and I'm like, I miss my family, I miss the beach, like it's cool, and so it took me a while to adjust, but 100% like at the end of the day, it was where I was supposed to be. And I met the most incredible people, all of my roommates every semester. I was random, and I still talk to every single one of my roommates today. We're really good friends. A lot of them were my bridesmaids, like, all that type of stuff. But I think the biggest takeaway that I got from BYU was the ability to understand the spiritual relationship of everything overarching my life. So before I was at BYU, I'd kind of compartmentalized everything. So I had my church life, I had my friends, I had my my work and all of that, and that's kind of how I, operated. And when I came to BYU, I learned really quickly that it's like, no, all of these things are avenues by which we get to help accomplish our mission on earth. And that doesn't change. Our mission on earth and why we're here and what we're here to do doesn't change from one place to another. And I think for BYU, that was really ingrained in me because alongside my studies, I was having all of these opportunities to also learn and grow spiritually and understand that, the Spirit understands everything about business. I can learn that. And so just, I think for me, that was like the biggest takeaway that honestly changed my life and my career trajectory, because I've seen step after step as I've done different things in my career post BYU, as I've focused on fundamentally the reason that I'm here is to help serve others and to help, develop myself and become more Christ-like and help gather Israel. As I've focused on that, every single piece of my career has played directly into that. And so it's been a cool, super cool synergy to see on kind of the flip side of coming out of BYU.
Remarkable. I love hearing that. And I just love the focus on just like how you can take what you've learned and continue to apply it.
Yeah. Just a quick question on the last one. What did you graduate with again?
Oh yeah, sorry, I skipped that part.
Good.
So I ended up finishing in business management. So I changed my major, I kid you not, 8 times while I was at BYU. I was interested in so many things. I had started the sports med program. I was going to apply to the finance program, and just like every semester got interested in other things. And then finally I was at a point I was like, I need to graduate. Like I have plans for post graduation. I got into my master's, like I just got to figure out. And so ended up doing business management, which was awesome. Was able to wrap it up with the classes I had, and it was great.
Thanks. That's awesome.
That's really cool to hear. Inspiring. It's okay to change majors a lot of times. It works out.
Totally.
That's awesome. Well, you touched a little bit on working at the Point, but we'd love to hear a little bit more about what your experience has been like about being the director of the Point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll clarify something there, because I'm sure there's somebody else in the state that has the title director of the Point. So I'm specifically asked to help oversee the innovation district at the Point. So okay. So that's where, like, when you look at my title, I think online it's like Director of Innovation Commercialization, Utah System Higher Education, the Point. So just clarify that, because I'm sure somebody has that.
We will emphasize that. Thank you for that.
But yeah, so it's been really interesting, and it's crazy because I actually first heard about the Point when I was at undergrad in BYU, and was just super fascinated with the initiative and kind of the state's vision to repurpose this place that originally, when the state prison was built, it was like not close to society, right? But as Utah has built up over time, it's like right there. And so kind of cool that the state had this plot of land. There's a lot of things that you can do with land like this. You could sell it to developers for a lot of money. And that's probably the most kind of the first thought people would have. But I thought it's pretty cool that the state's like, no, we want to invest in like the economic development and the growth of the area. And it is cool because it's kind of a connecting point between Salt Lake and Utah County, which are both really known for innovation, but specifically, you have Silicon Slopes right there. So specifically with working with the Innovation District, one of the things that my team has had the opportunity to do, and some of these trips I have participated in, others have gone on without me, but we've explored innovation districts across the country and across the world to see, a lot of times places will build cities like these innovation districts or innovation cities, but then they're dead. Like nobody ever goes there, like nobody ever does anything there. And so the big question we were asking ourselves on these trips are, okay, what actually are the key components to success of these types of areas? And the key takeaway was, in a lot of ways, these are not, if you build it, they will come. There has to be some programmatic ecosystem that already exists, and this becomes a place that can house the ecosystem. And so a lot of while originally it really started out as some real estate conversations, and that definitely still has to happen in order for buildings to get built and things like that. But my team spends a lot of our time focusing on the ecosystem and who are the big players in the ecosystem that would fit into a place like this, and what would they need to see for, to make something like this worth their time. For example, the Utah System of Higher Education has 16 institutions across the state. The idea with Convergence Hall is that, and again, this is the first building at the point that will be built. So not just the first building in the Innovation District, while it will sit in the Innovation District, like it is the first building. And there was $50 million allocated this last legislative session to support that. And the goal of that building and kind of the high-level vision is a place to bring together higher education, academia, investors, entrepreneurs to solve the biggest problems of not only the state, but the world. And so really, really impactful vision there. And each of the institutions of higher education will have an office at that location. They're talking about putting student housing on top. So places where people can come do internships for the summer, or professors can do entrepreneurial sabbaticals. So if you have a professor that's like, hey, I have this technology that I want to work on, come live out at the Point for a year, live at Convergence Hall, and then have all these resources to help support the commercialization. So with that vision, working with institutions across the state, some institutions are 10 minutes away from that location. Others are like 2, 3, 5 hours away. So I've spent a lot of my time, and early on in my job when I first got hired, I spent like 6 months going around visiting all the different institutions and asking professors and administrators, what do you need to make something like this worth it? And it was cool because kind of the two things that we've realized for especially these institutions that are far away is, number one, we need to be super creative about how we're building the virtual capabilities. So as we build the physical building, what types of resources, cameras, VR capabilities, things like that, do we need to put in place so that this can be a state-of-the-art location where it doesn't feel different whether you're in person or virtual. So we've been really creative about how we've thought about that. And then the other thing is, what are the types of equipment or laboratory space or resources that no institution of higher education wants to own themselves because it's too expensive or it's not used enough. But how many of those things would all schools benefit from having access to? And so we have a list of things that, like, the people down at Utah Tech are like, hey, if you could have X, Y, and Z, we would come up for a week to use it and it would be worth our time. And then the last thing is, especially as we think about AI, quantum computing, all of these emerging technologies, there's a lot of capabilities that need to exist inside the state for everybody to have access to, but they don't necessarily have to be housed at a single institution. So there's certain types of servers and databases and computers and things like that that remotely people can tap into. So we've been very thoughtful about how we've approached that and tried to engage a lot of the people that will involve in that throughout. And I've touched most highly on institutions of higher education because that's kind of where I've prioritized my time. But we've been having the same conversation with venture capital investors, government leaders, and all those different groups to figure out, we have an incredible ecosystem in Utah. How do we better connect it so that when this is built, it can be a vibrant community that is actually being built to solve problems, as opposed to like, here's a cool building, we hope you'll use it.
Awesome. There's so many cool things going on at the point, or like going to be happening. That's very cool to learn. I love the focus on how to make it a good experience in person, but also virtually as well. So that was really cool.
During your work for the state, what have you learned about tech transfer specifically?
Yeah, no, this is a great question, and I've learned a ton. I will say, when I was at Intermountain Health in their internal incubator, helping to spin companies out of the health system, that was my first exposure to tech transfer. I'd never heard of the thing in my life until then. And it was super interesting because I was actually in that role. I was asked to benchmark tech transfer offices from around the entire country, specifically relating to like health systems. So a little bit kind of a niche version of tech transfer. But I have found, after doing that work and then also working with the state, where I'm interfacing with every single one of the tech transfer offices in the state, that the problems and challenges are the same. No matter if it's healthcare related, it's at a university, the challenges remain the same across the board. So it's been super interesting. I've learned a ton about why typically tech transfer doesn't work very well. And I've learned a lot about places where it does work. And that's one thing where I talk about BYU and their tech transfer office literally all the time, because I have Utah Tech people saying, so just to kind of paint the landscape of the institutions of higher education, most of the technical colleges don't have any real tech transfer commercialization capabilities. There are some that have like entrepreneurship resource centers or things like that have kind of served that purpose, but no designated tech transfer. University of Utah has a tech transfer office that's massive. It's like 30 people, and then UVU has like a one person that's able to dedicate about 50% of their time to this. So like a half an employee. Weber State, kind of same thing. So there really aren't a ton of truly built out offices in the state. But that's kind of the overall landscape. And so like Utah Tech, they're now having some things come up where they're like, wait, we're actually seeing some really cool things come out. Like, how do we build our office? And I always tell everybody, I'm like, go talk to BYU. It's like I've been across the entire country and I've talked to the top offices in the country, and it's just not, in a lot of situations, it's not a good process. And the reason, kind of couple of the key reasons are, historically, tech transfer offices were measured by their ability to produce patents, license, and things like that. So that's a very specific type of professional, right? You need lawyers that can do the documentation, and that's kind of where that fits. Where tech transfer is kind of being measured now, and it's transitioning more and more that way, is towards actual ability to spin things out and to, you know, to get startups on their feet and things like that. And so if you have a lawyer that has spent most of their life in patents, it's a little bit different of a skill set than what is required to successfully get companies started. So there's kind of that changing dynamic. And so the historic personnel that have been asked to run these offices are kind of being tasked with something that maybe they haven't done before, or maybe requires the support of additional types of employees in order to really be successful on. The other thing that tech transfers had a really hard time doing historically is they historically are pretty siloed from the entrepreneurship resources or like support systems. And so there's not that synergy between how do we programmatically help these companies or how do we help them network properly. And so there's kind of been that disconnect. And then the last thing is tech transfer is like notorious for putting what we call poison pills in deals. So there's so many offices that will do these patents, they'll do these license agreements, they'll take years and years and years to get license agreements done, to the point where industry is like, yeah, we're not interested in working with you. It's too much of a headache. And then a lot of tech transfer offices kill the companies before they even have a chance of success, because they're putting into their deal terms, they want, you know, a massive amount of equity, or they want, you know, all of these things that it's like, and I come from venture capital, no investor is going to touch that down the line. So that company doesn't have any chance of success at any point in time because you already killed any deals they could ever have, which that's not good for the tech transfer office. They're not like 10% of zero is still zero, right? So it's like that whole dynamic.
Yeah.
So what I've been super impressed with BYU, because I've worked mostly with Mike a little bit before he left, but Dave has done a really good job of being inventor friendly. And the deal terms that BYU has come up with and that they work on with the founders are very favorable. They're favorable to the founders, and they're also favorable to future investors. So the office has a pretty good brand. I know with the faculty members, because I've spoken with numerous of them, has a really good brand internally of supporting and getting things done quickly. But they also have a great brand externally of, hey, they're going to do deals that are good for investors. They're going to help support these companies in getting out. And I know Dave, you guys, the office does a lot of percent of exit, which some people like, some people don't. And that can be difficult in that it's like, if the company doesn't exit, there's no revenue. But what BYU has found, and I think the data proves that, is when it comes to venture capital and it comes to startups, number of shots on goal is like one of the biggest predictors of success. Like, they've done all this research to try to say, how do you pick the right startup? And it's basically like the best analyst in the world. It's kind of like a sixes, right? Like, we don't really know, but if you can get more shots on goal, you have more likelihood of success. And so I know Dave, he always tells me, a deal is better than no deal, where there's a lot of other offices across the country, honestly, that don't operate that way. And so it's been interesting to see. And it's really about, when I talk to Dave, why do you do it this way? And he's like, well, part of it is we don't have an option. We were told we can't have a fund. We were told we can't do all these things, that it's just our job to get things out. But it's been super fruitful. And the other side is, we care about impact. We care about getting these things into people's hands where they can actually change lives. If you as a university or entity is so focused on how much are we going to get back for this, how much equity do we get to keep, it's never going anywhere. It's never going to help anybody, and you don't get any money. So I personally don't understand it, but it is very much a real thing.
In your opinion, what has been one of the most interesting technologies that you have seen on campus?
Yeah, when I saw this question, I was like, that's going to be so hard because I've honestly seen a lot of really cool things from the university. There's a company right now that we're looking at. One of the ones for me that was absolutely fascinating, and I think it's because while I was at undergrad, between my junior and senior year, I had the opportunity to do an internship at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And I was obsessed from the time I was in high school with this idea of an artificial womb. So how do you get, I was in like my, what is it called? My physiology class in high school, and we were going through fetal development. And we were talking about premature babies and why premature babies go in an incubator instead of that when they're born, that's where they're put. And it helps them to continue growing, but the development is stopped because the hormones and all that stuff is gone. They're no longer in the womb setting. So then the question I asked my teacher was like, well, why don't our incubators look more like a womb then? Like, why don't we have a system that more closely resembles the womb so that we can facilitate the development of the fetus and all the organs and additionally the growth. And so actually at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, they were working on a system just like this that does work. There's fetal sheep that are taken out of their mom early and put into this system that's full of artificial amniotic fluid, like very sci-fi. So I've always had this kind of fascination with like this kind of sci-fi concept because I think the more and more technology advances, the closer and closer we get to those technologies that like at one point seemed like this would never be a possibility. So for me, the Princess hologram, the Princess Leia hologram thing, super fascinating from that perspective because it is something that it's like people for years have seen and heard of, like, as far as on Star Wars and things like that. But think about the applications today and even think about like Convergence Hall, right? Like if that type of technology really exists, what does the new virtual VR reality look like? What types of creative things can you do? So that was one that was super interesting to me. But I think I've just been really impressed overall at the collaboration and the multidisciplinary technologies that come out of BYU. A lot of places have a really hard time getting your engineering department with your science department or with your biology department to actually come up with something. And I actually met with two professors at BYU yesterday that both have patents that were co-licensed, and they had worked on this NIH grant together to solve this really big problem surrounding bloodborne infections and detecting what microorganisms exist within the blood at time of or what that's causing the infection. And the reason that's so important is because sepsis, the bloodborne infection, is a leading cause of death. And so there's these technologies that BYU has been able to develop in a really unique way because of that collaboration across disciplines.
So what do you recommend for students who are interested in entrepreneurship using the tech transfer office? Like, what kind of advice would you give a student?
Yeah, I'm excited just to hear that there's student interns and things like that, because I think part of it is like go around BYU and ask how many kids know about what tech transfer even is.
Yeah.
I guarantee like a very, very small percentage. And so I think it's really cool that the opportunities and like the knowledge about that capability is being spread. And I think the other thing that BYU does that's really interesting for their MBA, I think they still do it for their MBA students, is the tech transfer. At one point during the master's program will go and say, here's a list of technologies. Is anyone interested in doing anything with these? And that's pretty cool. I wish that more students realized how actually non-risky this stuff is while you're an undergrad. Like, I think there's this perception of like, oh my gosh, it's so risky, but like, you have the least amount of risk you're ever going to have in your life. Like, you can get so much money from the school through grant. Like, you can get all this money without giving away any equity. You have people that are willing to support you and help you just because you're a student. Like, there's incredible opportunity. And the risk is, it's not like it doesn't exist, but like, you're going to graduate and get a job anyway. So like, at least you could try something else, and if it pans out, you keep doing it, and if it doesn't, then you don't, and you do what you were going to do anyway. Like, it's, to me, it's like, okay, if you're interested in entrepreneurship, you're kind of dumb if you don't try something in undergrad. Because I think specifically at BYU, I was talking to somebody, we were calculating it out, like, you can get $50,000 in non-dilutive funding for a startup as a student. Like, people on the other side, like, the second you graduate, that's kind of gone. So I think that's a big thing, and it's cool. Like, at Utah, one of the investments that we just did at the Utah Innovation Lab, which again, it's to help commercialize research coming out of universities. That includes student projects and faculty, traditional faculty tech transfer process type stuff, as well as like industry partnership that result in commercially viable products. But there's this student at Utah Tech that developed this technology, and he was actually our first investment. And I don't actually know if he's graduated or not, or if he's going to graduate, but he like leveraged the resources, built this giant prototype, like doing some really cool stuff. That's the opportunity that exists. But a lot of people don't take it because there's this like perception of risk that in a lot of ways as a student is not as much as it will ever be again.